let's get started. So thanks for joining, everyone. My name is Sean Kelly. I'm the Assistant Director of Career Advising here at the School of Public Health. Today, we're lucky to be in the company of some amazing alumni with careers that many of our participants aspire to pursue. So today, framed by the questions we received during registration and using the Q&A feature in the bottom of Zoom, we'll discuss strategies to maximize your career competitiveness. So from deciding which experience to pursue now as a student to how to make your application stand out from the crowd. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our panelists. I think in reverse alphabetical order by last name. I try to switch it up every time. So we'll start with Dr. Paola Gilsanz. Dr. Gilsanz is a research scientist at the Division of Research at Kaiser Permanente, Northern California. Dr. Gilsanz received her AB in Community Health, which is now Public Health at Brown, her MPH in Epidemiology and Biostatistics from the University of California, Berkeley, and doctorate in Social Epidemiology from Harvard University. Her research focuses on examining modifiable risk factors for dementia across the life course, with special attention to possible drivers of health disparities by sex and race and ethnicity. Thank you for joining. Max Clermont. Max, AB class of 2011 and MPH class of 2012, is a senior policy strategist based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. As co-founder of Data for Black Lives, he works to advance the organization's mission at the intersection of technology, racial justice, and advocacy. Max is inspired by work that protects rights, promotes equity, and closes the representation gap across all our systems and institutions. Thanks for joining, Max. And Najma Abdullahi, MPH class of 2017, is a medical student at Wright State University, Boonshoft School of Medicine. Najma has extensive research experience, including 2 years of graduate research at the Rhode Island Department of Health and experience as a scientific recruiter prior to enrolling in medical school. So thank you all for joining and welcome. So let's get started with a question for everyone, and then we'll move on to our pre-submitted questions and then answer any live Q&A during our quick lunchtime webinar today. So for everyone, and we'll maybe start in the same order that I introduced you, what would you say was your biggest learning experience since you graduated from Brown? What you know now that you didn't know then? So we'll start with Dr. Gilsanz.
I would say that my biggest, first of all, thanks for having me and inviting me to be part of this panel. I am very fond of Brown and my time there, so I'm happy to talk to students who are there now. I would say that my biggest learning experience was finding out that I am better suited with my skills to be behind a computer than working with communities, and that you can still help communities without being the person who interfaces with them. I entered public health thinking that I would be working in grassroots movements and felt really passionately about that. And turns out I'm actually really bad at that. I'm not great at speaking with a group of individuals and motivating them. And it's a great skill set to have, and it's what I don't really have. So I had to learn that about myself and find other ways to participate in advancing, health equity for everyone, but with a more realistic understanding of my personality. That's it.
I happened to take the other route, so I did the grassroots route. But the thing I kind of learned a lot about is, I think in many cases, I happen to often be the only public health person around the table. And I think there's a role that we play as a convener in getting people to think about the unique ways that systems work and change happens, and how to think about factors, both direct and indirect, that contribute to people's wellness. And so I think I've learned a lot about more from folks outside of public health than in the public health sphere.
And I would like to say thank you also for having me. I was really thinking about this question as you guys were both answering, because for me, I would say that my public health knowledge is definitely on pause right now, and it has been for a little bit. And I am about to start diving into a project, dusting off my skills in epidemiology and data analysis to start contributing to that project. But I think that's one of the greatest things about public health is that it's a unique skill set, like you guys both have said. It gives you a different like perspective to bring to the table. And it's an opportunity to, you know, serve the greater good of the people, right? And so I think just knowing that and knowing that I have that skill set is something that I appreciate and I'm happy to have gotten from Brown.
Great, thanks everyone. Great introductions to public health, which is obviously a very broad spectrum of career pathways available in it. And that's what's so exciting about it. And that's why I love doing what I love doing. So we'll dive into our questions that we received from registrants in advance. I think one that's especially important today is, hello, and thank you for doing this. Do you have any advice on how to get involved in community organizing? That one might be most appropriate for Max, but it's up to the panelists.
Sure, I'll start. I think for me, it was kind of easy because my first job, when I first entered a public health program, I thought I would end up like working in a hospital or working in research. And when I graduated in 2012, there was a lot happening, kind of like, you know, I think the times we're graduating now. And so I had a friend who was working on Obama's reelection campaign. I was like, hey, Max, I know you're studying public health, but like, do you want to be an organizer in West Palm Beach, Florida? And I said, I mean, I have some experience managing people, managing projects. I have done some organizing in the Providence area. I do have some policy experience, but like, I'm not sure if I'll be equipped for this job, right? Just because of my training. And then I thought about down the line, how would people in the public health sphere, if I decided to go back that professional route, interpret my experience as an organizer on a electoral campaign? I decided to go work as an organizer. And I think what I learned there was really thinking about how you get people to organize around a mission and setting goals. And, you know, whether it was goals around knocking doors or making phone calls or how many volunteers you needed to recruit, I think my role as a field director there was trying to like organize people around making a plan to see our goals through. And I think that was like my first experience, but it's more about like the skills I learned, the organizing instincts and tactics that have like kind of guided my whole professional career around empowering leaders, helping people set a goal and a vision, helping them think about specific tactics and tools, helping them think about how do you meet people where they are, et cetera. So I think the best advice I have is like to do an organizing or find an organizing role, whether it's for a cause, a campaign, a candidate, a policy issue, and go do it. And I think less about if you win the specific cause, it's more about the skills that you learn and how you learn about like people and what motivates people to act or take action on behalf of a cause.
Great, thanks,
I
have
a quick question, Sean. Based off that, when I was at Brown, there was a community organizing class. Is that still around? Do you guys know?
That is a good question. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah. Well, if it is around, I recommend it.
I hope so. No, that's great.
I would also just like to add to that a little bit. I just want to say that it's a broad area, right? Before coming to Brown, I actually worked in the city. I'm from Cambridge, and so I spent a lot of time working in the youth centers and like partnering with the Cambridge Public Health Department to like, you know, push an agenda for the youth where they could do social justice projects in their own city and like teaching them those skill sets. So like it's a broad area of work. And so I think, you know, Max is definitely like the professional in that area. But I think for you guys right now in college, like there's so many ways that you can get involved at your like local community and just start like honing those skills. So like I challenge all of you to do that.
I think that's a great segue. I mean, it speaks to those transferable skills and really exploring what you're passionate about. And so it's a segue into the next question that I get a lot from students saying like, what am I supposed to do to make myself a more competitive applicant? And I say like, what are you passionate about? And so in your experiences, if somebody were to ask you like, how should I spend my time outside of class? Should I focus on research opportunities, internships, summer jobs, student organizations? What would you say to them?
I'd say that what's most valuable and what will come across in your application is kind of if you know what you are passionate about, as you were saying, Sean, and taking the opportunity to explore different aspects of what you're interested in pursuing. And if that's, if you think you want to do research, then go see what it's like to analyze data and be a researcher. Or maybe you're interested in the recruitment aspect of research, or if you're interested in community organizing, try to get involved in that. But I think it's important to demonstrate that you have some experience in what you think you might be interested in, not just for your application, but so that you know for yourself if that's really something you want to do.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think the specific skills I reflect on, or any opportunities that help build your writing skills or communication skills. I mean, I think a big part of public health in general is just like, especially now. I mean, when you see, there's a lot about communicating to people of different backgrounds and who speak different languages, but who also are oriented around more technical people and less technical people. And so I think it's really about owning in on like your communication skills, your written communication, verbal communication, whatever opportunities help you own in on those skills. I think that's a very important thing. And I think whether it's in a student group or trying to like really figure out how you build your people management experiences, and how do you learn how to work with different kinds of people. I wasn't a big fan of group projects in college, but honestly, when I think about just our orientation, especially in public health, around teams and teamwork and bringing different folks of different skill sets around the table to work towards a common vision, like it matters if you can help move folks along and facilitate. And so whether you can do that in a student group, a cultural student group, and you can do that leading a volunteer organization in Providence, or you can do that in a classroom, or as a TA or as an RA. So I think those skills are important.
And I would like to add that I think when you're an undergrad, I think that a lot of people believe that they have to do everything. And sometimes they get really stuck in that mentality of quality. See, I'm confused. But I meant like just doing everything and trying to wear multiple hats. And at the end of the day, you really do have to focus on quality, show that you're really good at something, be passionate about whatever that project is, and do it over a couple of years, right? Like if you start something your freshman year, keep going at it. Don't give up and pick up a different project, even if you find something else. I think that shows that like commitment, and that you can take things all the way to the end. So.
Yeah, I would actually, I just thought about one thing, especially if you're at an institution like Brown. I think take advantage of, leverage the institution and the relationships it has, because it's much more harder when you don't have that institution behind you to like get certain opportunities. So Brown has a relationship with the Department of Public Health, like leverage that with the city, with the state of Rhode Island, with the prisons in Rhode Island. And I think it's much harder, for example, to like break into that as like an outsider or like after you leave Brown, right? And so I think the great thing about breaking into those institutions while you're at Brown is, one, it might lead to an opportunity there, or it just like might open like some doors down the line. And so I think like leverage the Brown name and use that to get into some of these doors while you're there. And hopefully they pay off a little bit later too.
And on a similar note, there's a lot of really interesting research going on at Brown too. So if you think that you're interested in pursuing research, get involved in research projects. I think another skill set that I really appreciate having guidance in as a student is the math skills. So, I think some of the statistical methods can be challenging to be self-taught. So I really appreciated having people who guided me in how to implement them and learn about them outside of the classroom too.
And that's really helpful. It leads to our next question. What has been the most helpful in terms of like preparation while at Brown for your path or your current role? In terms of like research or teaching experience or learning technology, what would you say was the most helpful?
I think for me, it's definitely the data analysis piece, and being able to not only run the numbers myself, but also read and analyze a paper when I'm like learning for school or my own research projects. I think that's definitely invaluable. And it was both in the classroom and at the times that I was in those different research projects that I was doing, being able to like, have somebody sit next to me and teach me SAS, even though I never learned SAS in class. I thought that was, invaluable. So definitely something I appreciate.
Yeah, I think the data skills are critical. I do have to say that I was not really into the technical stuff. I almost I think like I had to do it just because, and I think it's very important. But I loved how to figure out how you turn the numbers into recommendations or solutions, or help it or make it more digestible. So I think a lot about data visualization, and more about like how you get more people to understand what the data means. I think to some extent how you got there and like what numbers you crunch and what tools you use are critical. But in many cases, most folks really want to know what to do with the numbers and how it might inform like solutions, and changing outcomes.
So I did my undergrad at Brown. So I think there the most helpful thing that I learned was really taking the opportunity to take a bunch of classes in different areas of public health. So I knew I wanted to do public health, but I wasn't quite sure what aspect. And I also took a lot of sociology classes as well. And, later on went on to get my doctorate in social epidemiology, which talks about like social determinants and psychosocial determinants of health. And so I think Brown really helped me get a foundation in that and let me discover that that was part of public health too. And I think that's been really valuable. Even though I didn't get my master's at Brown, I do want to say that while I was studying my master's, that's when I really fell in love with numbers and data analysis, and having a degree specifically like a master's in epidemiology, specifically in biostatistics. It was a combined degree. I think really made it easy to demonstrate that I had the math skills necessary to do the analyses later on when I was trying to get jobs and apply for different like research programs. I could say, here's the coursework that I took and I got a degree in it. And that's not the only way to go about demonstrating that you have the math skills. It was just kind of an easier path for me to do it. Also because I really needed the teaching in the math. Again, I love statistics and what you can do with it and how it can help you answer questions, but it wasn't something that I found that easy to learn on my own. And I really benefited from the guidance of teachers and experiences.
And one specific class that stood out for me was qualitative research methods. And so when I think about, the technical biostat stuff is good, and anthropology was also another department too, around like field research and focus groups and interviews with people. And the data analysis is a little bit different there, but I think that skill set is kind of underrated.
Great, really insightful. Quick follow-up question for Najma. Did you use the medical school application process, which is pretty prescriptive, if you will, to kind of inform your experiences, or did you take all of these kind of experiences that you're passionate about, put them together and apply to med school?
That's a great question. So as I mentioned earlier, I am a non-traditional student. So I graduated in 2011 from undergrad. I took 5 years before coming to grad school at Brown. And in those 5 years, I did a lot of public health work. And those are the things that I was passionate about. And I also, it's kind of weird because I did a lot of other things I was passionate about in that time, public health and the the youth work that I was doing was always something that was like consistent in those 5 years, but everything else was like, you know, me joining Dana-Farber to do cancer research because I was a bio undergrad and I hated that. And so that was something that I needed to learn firsthand. After that first year and a half, I was like, gotta go. And I started doing the scientific recruiting because I was like, I'm better at talking to people than I am, you know, playing around with mice in the lab. So all of those experiences definitely were things that I was interested in. And so it was all about like my passion driving my next goal, I would say. And when I landed at Brown, that same mentality, I kept that same mentality. So I, you know, was jumping around trying to find projects that I thought, you know, were interesting. I alluded to the fact that the project that I was doing at Women and Infants definitely stuck to me the most. That was what I was most passionate about. And so as a master's student there, you definitely had to do that thesis. And so I could have just done one paper because I was very fortunate to like get to Brown and be awarded one of their assistantships. So I was working at the Department of Health like 20 hours every week doing that assistantship and working on that project. So I could have just done that project and been done with my paper, but I opted to do a secondary paper at the under Dr. Erica Werner, and she is phenomenal. I loved just being in that atmosphere and being encouraged by her to like just take everything a step further. So all of those experiences, I would say, it was like packaging it and like selling myself to show them that I am interested in public health, but I'm also interested in women's health specifically, and what that will look like for me moving forward, I'm not sure, but it was easy to sell, I would say.
Thank you. So it's kind of, yeah, intersectionality of like making sure that all of your passions align, and you don't necessarily have to do, you know, a career in whatever research project you're involved in or internship experience you've had, et cetera. So let's move to a very generic question, and then we'll go to a very specific question. So the very generic question is, I just decided to concentrate in public health, so probably a second or third year student at Brown. And I don't know what career path I should take. Any advice now that you've graduated for what I should do to inform next steps?
Even if you don't know what you want to do specifically in public health, I think the one thing that I was just very curious about a lot of different things. And so if you could narrow down like some questions you have about how things work or what systems you're interested in. I have a very non-traditional route. I have an MPH, but my first real kind of public health job was maybe about 3 years ago when I decided to move to the south side of Chicago to help stand up a trauma center at the University of Chicago as a chief of staff. And it was a hospital administrative job, right? But the context of building a trauma center in the south side of Chicago, when you're talking about the social determinants of health, when you're talking about violence as a public health issue, it almost became less about, you know, standing up the trauma center, recruiting faculty and putting all these systems and procedures in place, and more about how do you engage the community in the process, and how do you think about not treating people and treating them, but like thinking about how you think about their lived experience, the built environment. And I think what I learned most is when public health is something that involves like social services and housing and education and legal. And so I think in many cases, if you could try to narrow down, like, what are the big kind of questions you have about like public health or the areas you may want to focus, and then trying to figure out how you build experiences that allow you to dig a little bit deep into some of the questions that you're curious about. And I think that will lead you somewhere. I think I had a very narrow view of what public health was at Brown. And I think to some extent, the public health department, which has evolved since the time I've been there, kind of tried to put you in a few different boxes. And I felt that in many cases, if I didn't fit into the epi or the biostats, or I didn't want to do work in Samoa with the International Health Institute, there wasn't like a role for me. And I think in many cases, I think the public health department and the school is starting to use the same spirit as Brown, the open curriculum, and having people chart their own course, because public health is something that like touches everything. And I think now when you think about in the midst of the global, I think there might be some fear about it, like going into the job market right now, but I think like public health folks are on demand. I mean, we have the dean on TV every day, you know, you have folks, the first president-elect, the first thing he did was put together a COVID recovery task force, right? And if you look at the backgrounds of everybody who's gonna be making some big decisions about how the economy recovers, how our country gets back on track, how we get schooling happening again, it's folks with a public health background. It's an exciting time to be in the public health space. And so I think I would view that, I would not enter that with fear. I think it's an exciting opportunity. And if there's any time to be in public health, it's now. So I would seize that opportunity.
Piggybacking off of you, I just want to say, even in here, like as a medical student, all of those same questions that you were like posing, Max, are the same kind of questions that they're teaching us right now as first year medical students. And I love having that advantage and having that skill set already to like go into my, practice clinicals and be like ready to go. Whereas a lot of my classmates, they're not thinking about like someone's built environment. They're not thinking about how that like impacts them on their day to day. When we ask questions about like, do you go for a walk? Like, do people even feel safe walking in their neighborhoods? Like people don't think about these things. And so it's important even in the field of medicine. And we bring it back every day.
I would just say something that both of you guys hinted upon, which is just like the wide variety of ways that you can work in public health might seem a bit daunting and overwhelming when you're trying to decide which path you want to take. But the really great thing is that it also means it's very forgiving and that there's a lot of things that you can do. And as you learn more about what you're interested in, there's a really, really good chance that there is something within public health that's going to make you happy and allow you to pursue your interests. And that's both like the substantive area about like what topics are important to you, but also, the skill sets and your personality type with what you do in that area. So if you're interested in maternal and child health, you can work with mothers and children, or you can do research on it, or you can do policy for it. There's just so many different ways to address so many different issues because public health is touches upon everything, in my opinion. And I think that's a really great aspect that will allow you to, continue to grow and develop as an individual across your life course.
Great, thanks everyone. I feel silly asking the next question because those answers were so inspiring and empowering that the next question is, what should I focus on when it comes to logistics? Like, should I be networking? Should I be building out my LinkedIn profile? Do I need to like pay someone to review my cover letter, which by the way, I'll do it for free for you. Logistically, tactfully, what should I do when I'm ready to start applying for opportunities?
I think there's nothing more powerful than networking in today's society. So if that means going to these webinars, go to them. If that means going to the conferences that'll be happening in the future, show up, make sure that you introduce yourself and that you have your elevator pitch ready to go. People like someone who's presentable, I guess, goes a long way. And those relationships will definitely help you.
Pre-pandemic, I would probably answer this a little bit differently. I do think like networking looks different now without in-person and without conferences in the same way. So I do think as much as I think LinkedIn is something that you should really like build out. And I think it's less about, you don't have to build out the bullet points as much. It's more about the connections, right? Seeing who knows who. If you're like really, I think it also might be a smart investment to get LinkedIn Premium, right? That allows you to send cold messages to people. And that might be something that maybe there's a way the career services can help see that through for people, especially in a time like this. And I think it's like, again, there's an opportunity to leverage while you're at Brown now to leverage the institution. Like Brown alumni are everywhere doing everything in so many different institutions. And so I often look up leaders or people or organizations that I'm inspired by, or I like their mission, and go to the team or about, and find who may have went to Brown. And in many cases, I'll find someone who went to Brown, type them up in LinkedIn, and then voila. So I think that's an important thing to do. And I think the other thing is, think about platforms like Twitter. I think there's a public health, especially in the midst of this pandemic, a lot of public health leaders and practitioners are like, and medical students as a whole, a whole bunch of medical students, especially as we kind of have these broader conversations around policy and race, and there's a way that folks are organizing online and connecting with like-minded people online. And so if that means sliding into the DMs on Twitter, like it works. And I'm speaking from experience. And I think it's like, I think at some point we will figure out how to be offline again, but I think I would figure out how to build out your social media presence and online.
On a much kind of smaller scale, I think it's important that if the opportunity that you're applying for requires a level of attention to detail, that you reflect that in your cover letter and your CV. So I think it is great to have someone review your CV. It's great to have someone review your cover letter, no matter what you're applying for, but especially if you're applying for a position, I would say, I work in research, so if you're applying for a research position, you really want to show that you have attention to details, and that your cover letter and your CV, the formatting, the spelling, the grammar, all reflect that. I imagine that's also important for communications. If you're applying for a communication job, to make sure your cover letter shows good communication.
Great, thanks all. So I think now's a good time to share like one last final piece of advice for those pursuing diverse careers in public health. What's your pitch of what you should do next?
The thing I would do next is think about when public health comes to mind, like who comes to mind or what comes to mind. I mean, if when you think about public health, you think about a senator or a representative, you think about Congress, or if you think about public health, you think about a president of a hospital or insurance company. Or if you think about public health, you think about, there's a doctor or a surgeon. Or when you think about public health, it's about, food, or if it's about food deserts, or if you care about equity and racial justice, if you care about math. I think it's like, what does public health mean to you? And I think if you start there and start brainstorming like folks who represent public health, institutions or organizations that represent public health, I think that's a good place to just start jotting down. And then from there, I think it's like trying to like connect the dots and seeing how you find a way to that organization, to that person, to learn more about what public health looks like in practice at that place. So I think that's a great place to start. And I think what you realize when you go, if I had 10 people do this exercise in a room, everyone's paper would look different, because public health just means and looks different to folks depending on their lived experiences and what their passions and interests are.
And I would say stay open-minded. This journey is unique for everybody, whether that means you take some time to, really evaluate what you're interested in post undergrad and getting some field experience. I think there's power to that. So don't box yourself in. Learn from the people around you. I think public health definitely is a people science. And so if you can just learn about behavior and see what makes people tick, or, like that, all of that gives you a lot of insight to like how to change behavior. And I think that's what we all do in a lot of different ways.
And piggybacking off of that, being open-minded and like as I said before, the great thing about public health is there's so much variety in areas that you can work in ways that you can work in. So don't be scared to try something new. Follow what you really care about, and because there's so much variety, like it might not be a straight line, but you can still really land in places that you like just by pursuing what you want to do and what interests you, and make a difference in the world, which is kind of what we're all hoping to do.
Great. Love the ending. So on that note, go and change the world, everyone. Thanks so much to our panelists for participating today. It's really insightful for me and everyone who participated. We'll also share this webinar online for future watchers. And so thank you again. We joined from multiple time zones today, which I think is what's awesome about Zoom, looking for the silver linings. And yeah, thanks so much for your inspiring words today, everyone. All right, have a great day.